The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
Welcome to episode 11 of the Florida Podcasting News Show on the Florida Podcast Network. Florida Podcasting News keeps you on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.
On today's episode, we'll be talking about a book featuring a ton of Florida podcasters and sharing a valuable event promo code in Florida's podcasting news. In our general podcasting segment, we'll discuss Podfading and the 10 commandments of podcasting. Then we'll catch you up on the latest going on with the Florida Podcast Network, including a debut date of our newest show, Florida Beer Podcast with David Butler of the Florida Beer blog. And we'll close out the show with a final tip I'm sharing from a recent presentation I did at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting.
This episode is brought to you by Flintstone Media.
And reporting live from my couch.
That's right. We are together on the portable setup today.
It sounds a little different than usual.
Yes.
Yeah,
because we're recording into the Tascam. So
here we go. Thanks for joining us. This is Jemmy.
And this is Glenn. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Florida Podcasting News Show. And I will say, this is a podcasting show. This is a show about podcasting.
Yeah.
So we are using our Tascam DR40.
DR40.
And it's what we use when we record on the road for Finding Florida.
For our other show.
Yep, for our other show. So we decided instead of hooking up the mixer on the mess that is Jemmy's desk, we would...
you made it the mess, okay? You're the one who last broadcast from over there, if I remember correctly, Friday morning. So bite me.
We've had a good weekend full of meetings down here and building the Florida Podcast Network.
We've had a lot of awesome and very interesting conversations. Big things, I'm sure, are coming down the pipeline. But something else I've been up to recently, I just got back from doing a presentation in Pembroke Pines, Miami area, for the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. So Danny Pena from Gamertag Radio, he invited me down. As I had mentioned in the last episode, I was going to be heading there to do a presentation with him, and it was a lot of fun. It was all about story structure, and I'm going to be diving into that a little bit for our final tip. But just let you know that if you want to catch all the slides from that presentation, you can go to flintstonemedia.com/CSB for Connecticut School of Broadcasting. That's flintstonemedia.com/CSB to see the slides from my presentation. A lot of good information in there about how to start a show. So there you go. And as usual, where can they find the show?
Well, this show is released on the 1st and 15th of every month. There is a monthly newsletter that accompanies it once a month. So go to floridapodcastingnews.com for all the details and to sign up for the newsletter, which Jemmy works very hard at.
Thank you very
I do
much.
not.
And next up is Florida industry news. Well, our buddy Chris Krimitsos, Chief Creative Officer of the Florida Podcasters Association, sent us an email the other day. He wanted to share a very valuable promo code. In fact, I can prove it's worth $100, guys. It's a very valuable promo code. And it is for Podcast Movement, which is coming up. You know Chris Krimitsos is the guy behind PodFest, which is every year in Orlando. Well, Podcast Movement is also coming this year to Orlando. It's going to be down here from the 13th to the 16th of August, so just a month and a half away, guys. Get your tickets now. There are going to be about 3,000 podcasters in attendance. They're from all over the place, and it's a very different conference than Podfest. Podfest is really geared for more the independent Podcast Movement. It's just a different slice of the industry, but I encourage everyone to go. It's really awesome, and so you can get $100 off your ticket, any ticket level, with the promo code. Write this down, get pens and pencils ready. It is FPA PM19, FPA PM19, and you can get your tickets at podcastmovement.com, and it's going to be exciting. You're going to be there.
I'll be there. You'll be there.
I'll be there.
That's right.
We'll both be there. So be there, be square. You got to meet us.
I think the last time we were at Podcast Movement together was in California.
Anaheim, California.
Yeah, that's right.
So this time I'm very happy there will be no jet lag involved.
Last time we were right down the street from Disney, and this time we'll be right down the street from Disney.
There you go. Just a different brand of Disney.
Right.
Perfect. I love it.
Well, my friend David Hooper shared a link. He has written a book called Big Podcast. Now, what this has to do with Florida is there are several Florida podcasters that are highlighted in the book, including Lee Silverstein, our friend who does the Colon Cancer Podcast and has the Cancer Podcast Network.
We Have Cancer.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right. He changed the name.
And
that's right.
I may or may not be redesigning his website. I'm just throwing that in.
So he's in this book. Apparently, it's a very good book. It's gotten a lot of praise as one of the best books ever written about podcasting. I'm going to order it and read it. David's a good guy and knows a lot of stuff. He's been around in this industry for about 15 years, I think.
Wow.
Dave Jackson, our friend from the School of Podcasting, highly recommends this book and said it's really good. So
fantastic.
It's called The Big Podcast. It's pretty cheap on Amazon. Just look up A Big Podcast and you'll find it there.
You know what's cool about that? I'm going to read a book all about my friends.
That's right.
That's pretty awesome. And next up in Florida podcasting news. So Palm Beach podcasters, our next meetup is happening on July 16th. It's a Tuesday. And we have a topic now for that meetup. So Paul will be presenting this time around on podcasts that convert. So, always when we get, especially with new podcasters or newer podcasters within like the first year of their podcasting career, they're super focused on how do we break the monetization code and how do we reach the goals of, expanding our email list or whatever it is that your goal is for your podcast. He has some tips on how to convert your listeners into customers. So he's going to use a little bit of his digital marketing experience and all of that. So it's going to be really, really awesome way to learn how to build a listener supported podcast. I mean, you do that quite a bit. You have your auditors, which are, they're all Patreon members, right? And so there are different ways to create a listener supported podcast. So Paul will be going into all of that. Head to palmbeachpodcasters.com for all the information. I hope to see you guys on July 16th at Venture X in Palm Beach Gardens with Paul. It's going to be a lot of fun.
And if you're in the Tampa area, the second Tuesday of every month is when they hold their meetings over in Tampa. You can find information out about that at Florida Podcast Association on Facebook.
And that is run by our buddy, the aforementioned Chris Kremitzos.
It's a good meeting. That's the one I go to occasionally.
You are listening to the Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida. FPN is committed to promoting local brands and businesses through a network of podcasts celebrating the Sunshine State, and you can be a part of it. Are you a Florida Visitors Bureau, publication, blogger, or attraction looking to more regularly reach your townspeople and tourists? Turn your content into an ongoing podcast as one of our affiliates. With your own show, you can create lasting content that increases your public exposure and positions your brand to represent the voice of your corner of Florida. And FPN will guide you every step of the way, launching your turnkey podcast in just a few weeks. Once part of our network, affiliates can then turn their podcasts into profit centers by selling ads and securing sponsors for their episodes. If you're interested in elevating your Florida brand and becoming part of the voice of Florida, head to floridapodcastnetwork.com/partner with us for more information, to download our media kit, and to reach out. The Florida Podcast Network, celebrating Florida one local voice at a time.
Well, it's now time for the national podcasting news, and there's always a lot of it, but this time it really did focus on one thing. There's a lot of articles out that are focusing on one thing, and I have not talked to Jemmy about this.
As per usual,
this will be our first conversation
close
about
to the cuff.
That's right. So there was an article that was not designed for podcasters, because if anybody reads this, they're going to be popping peas everywhere. It's a pointed perspective on the purported podfading problem, and I apologize. I apologize for the popping peas, because we are holding our mics and we don't have our screens on or nothing. So he didn't think about that when he wrote the article.
Perspective on the purported podfading problem. Did they not consider the podcasters you would be talking about?
Okay, now you've got them turning off the show. So there was a couple articles relating to Blueberry, who just released some numbers. And what Blueberry says is just under 280,000 of the 706,000 podcasts out there have produced an episode in the last year. That means 39% of all podcasts were in production in the last year, which is higher than I thought. Or look at it through a different lens, more podcasts, 60%, are out of production than in. And I really thought it would be higher out of production. He drilled down now into the last 3 months, February, March, and April, and during that period, only 126,000 of all existing podcasts had an episode, which means it's 18%.
That's true. I mean, unless you're a seasonal podcast, if you've had your last episode was 6 months ago, you're defunct.
You're pretty much out. So, there were a couple things in this article. One of them said, that they saw the Blueberry stats shared across multiple things, and it was everywhere. It was on every Facebook page. There were numerous articles and blog posts about it. And consistently, people were saying, stick with it, be consistent. I haven't missed a show in 5, 10, 15 years. There were all of these comments, as there always is. But you know what? It is really hard to make good content to build an audience.
It's true.
It is hard. Jimmy and I know that. We've had shows that have made it. We have had shows that have failed.
You can't take pre-planning for granted. You just can't.
Well, podcasting gurus will tell you that, and I'm one of them, that consistency over time.
Oh, wait. Don't skip over that. You just called yourself a podcasting guru. Look at you.
I'm one of them who will say, you need to be consistent, but you also need to have good content and content that's relevant to your target audience.
That's true.
So, and then you have to have a marketing plan. All the good content in the world, if nobody knows about it, is not going to help you. So that's the piece that most podcasters miss, is the marketing plan. I thought it was interesting, though, that in this article, there was an analogy with TV. And on the Horse Radio Network, we've probably had 22 or 23 shows over time, and there are 6 or 7 that didn't make it for whatever reason. They podfaded, they got interested in something else, the hosts, they just went away. Or we canceled them because the numbers weren't good enough. So that's the same with TV. Did you realize in 2015 there were 1,500 primetime television shows because of all the networks now? 1,500. So you got to think that there were anything from Big Bang to on and on and on. But right now, only 30% of those shows are still around in 2019.
Wow.
So it happens in every medium. There's going to be shows that come and go. And it all comes down to, were they good and did they build an audience?
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
Right.
So Ed Ryan, our friend who does a show, Beach Talk Radio here on the Florida Podcast Network, did an article in the
Podcast Business Journal.
Yeah, Podcast Business Journal. And he did an article, and it was very interesting. It was about this topic. And he said, as someone who interviews podcasters and writes about them every day, I can tell you with 100% certainty, podcasters don't care about the numbers. Whether 300,000 podcasts are active, 500,000 are active, or 700,000 active, we just don't care. Whether 14 podcasts launched this month, 400 or 5,000, we don't care. We're just launching our own. And I agree with some of what he's saying in this article, but not everything. Here is what he says should be a good plan for starting a podcast. And I agree with most of this. But he says, will my show be weekly or monthly? You get that question. We get that question all the time.
All the time. And we always land somewhere in the middle, bi-weekly.
Yep. That's what I start all my shows bi-weekly. I don't believe you can build an effective audience monthly. I don't think people hang with you. It's just too long before they get another episode.
Or discover another show.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they get disinterested. But weekly is too much for most new podcasters to start out. It's just a lot of work.
It's a recipe for podfading for most content creators because you're not used to being a content creator.
That's right. Approximately how long will your show be? It doesn't freaking matter as long as it's good the entire time.
That needs to depend on a lot of factors, including, honestly, just what is the topic of your show.
And how much time you have.
Right. So there's no straight answer for that whatsoever.
How much research will I put into my show every week? Important. Be prepared. That's what makes a good show. Who is my audience? You need to know who that is.
By the way, that research, it includes building the content that you're going to speak about. It includes researching who your guest is going to be if you have a guest show. It includes, just diving deep and looking at articles. I mean, it can be all kinds of stuff depending, again, on the substance and topic of your show. You need to do some research no matter what you're doing. It's true.
How can I grow my audience? Well, again, have a marketing plan. That's that's one of the most asked questions on the Facebook pages too. Dave Jackson he says it all along the last 10 years. He said, you got to go where your audience is, which means you do have to get out of your basement every once in a while.
It's true. You absolutely have to do. Like case. You just went to another trade show.
Denver. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And we always are going to different, travel and tourism things and conferences and all kinds of stuff. We went to a brewery, dang it. And I drank some beer, took one for the team, man. Building your audience.
All of those things are good. And I think the thing that people forget about the most, I think people do try and think about their content. Most people, unless it's three guys drink a beer in a basement that don't care and just talk about anything. But most people do think about their content. What they don't think about is marketing each episode and how they're going to do that. There was another article that was out done by the podcasthost.com, Matthew McLean, and I don't know him. But it was an article, again, relating to this, and it talked about the 10 commandments of podcasting, which actually he had 14 of. So, but
the 10 commandments of podcasting is there obviously are no rules.
Yeah.
Because he has 14.
But I thought it was interesting because I thought they were good, and I wanted to talk to Jemmy about them. And I agree with some of these, and I don't agree with some of these. Thou shalt not have an extra long theme tune in the beginning. Yes, keep it short.
Oh, wait.
I think
no,
as
seriously.
we're getting along in time, we're making them shorter.
I'm not even joking. There's one show, and I've actually spoken to the hosts about this before, and I think they've since made an adjustment. Their intro song, it was great, but it was like 2.5 minutes long, and I was out. I didn't want to listen to any of it. So yeah, cut your music back, make it shorter in the beginning. If you want to do something at the end, whatever. But at the beginning, your intro
10-15 seconds is about all.
Short, guys.
And I think that over time, when we first started 10-15 years ago, we could do longer ones because people were used to that from radio. But now,
and from television, having your theme music and all that.
But now you notice no TV shows have an opening anymore.
Remember, it's about instant gratification. They want to turn on your show and just get to the stuff as soon as possible. So yeah.
Thou shalt not spend 10 hours editing an episode, which unless it needs it. Our Florida podcast, our travel
Finding
show
Florida,
is 10 hours of editing.
At least.
Yes. So
on a good day.
I think that depends on the show.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not do a podcast.
But I think what he means is don't over edit.
Yeah.
It's so easy to edit to such a ridiculous degree that you lose the flow of the conversation and it sounds like two robots suddenly picked up microphones. So don't over edit.
Thou shalt not do a podcast that's for everyone about all sorts of stuff.
Oh, God, we hear that all the time.
And this is one of my biggest pet peeve. You've got to focus on a market. You've got to focus on a niche because, boy, the problem with doing a podcast that's for everyone is who do you market to?
Right.
There's no direct places you can go to market because it's everyone.
We were followed by a podcaster on Instagram the other day, and I looked at their Instagram bio to see what's their show about. And it was something like, we talk about all kinds of interesting things and funny stuff about our lives. What?
Yeah. Who are
you? Why do we care?
And who are you going to target to?
Right.
And
again, it goes back to the marketing situation in the first place. If you don't have a good niche, if you don't have if you can't define your audience, how in the heck can you come up with a marketing plan? So you need to define your show so you can define your audience, so you can define your marketing.
And that's true of any business, not just podcasting. That's rule number one of business is how am I going to market it?
100%.
Yep. And the next one, one of my biggest pet peeves is album art, is cover art for shows. Jemmy knows this. Thou shalt not cram too much into your cover art. You have to remember that most people are seeing your cover art at about 100 pixels by 100 pixels on a podcast player. And if you have tiny little words, they can't read it.
Yeah.
So the words need to be big. Your graphics need to be minimal. We went through this. Jemmy and I have had some discussions, sometimes heated on this over the time.
Discussions / arguments, whatever.
But like with the Florida Podcasting Network logo, we went for months on that one back and forth. But what we came out with was something that you got
to the point where when I was doing my presentation at Kinetic School of they made me rewind to the slide with the logo on it because I wanted to talk about how awesome the logo
and all it is the FPN in a certain font with a microphone with an orange as the top.
Now, hold on, because sometimes the visuals can be very important. We can't be hypocrites here. Finding Florida's logo is very visual. And the key to that...
But the words are very readable.
Right. Yeah.
And
so the key to that is don't lose your words when you're making it, when you're making the visuals pop a little bit more, and make your visuals very relevant and very identifiable, like super easy. So our visual is the perspective of hands holding binoculars. Pretty much everyone can relate to what that is as soon as they see it. One of my other clients just started working with them, just talked about their show art, and they only had words on their thumbnail. And I said, look, people are going to be flying by these things and they're not even going to read your thumbnail. So you have to have something that pops at, and what they came up with was brilliant. Long story short, it's a drug abuse prevention in schools kind of a podcast. They talk about programs for drug. So what they did was they had a kid write drug free on their knuckles. Remember being a kid and writing on your knuckles, right? And words like a little letter on each one and put them together. So they had a kid put drug free on their knuckles, hold them. And that is the bold image on the, and it is so expressive because it brings you right back to your school days. It brings you, it's right there what it is. And the words are actually part of the visual. So it's brilliant. So you can have visuals, but make sure that they're relevant and they're bold and then they don't overtake the words.
One of the others here is, thou shalt not make your listener adjust volume levels more than once in an episode. There is a particular show that I listen to. This drives me insane. You need to run it through Auphonic or you need to levelate occasionally. Yeah, because I was just up and down the whole time.
Yeah.
And boy, that's annoying for a listener.
Yeah.
So Auphonic is an option, auphonic.com, or Levelator is free. Just run it through there. It levelates everything, and then you won't have your listeners going insane. Thou shalt not ask an interviewee to introduce themselves.
I go back and forth on this one because sometimes it depends, right? Right. We
do it sometimes because we're traveling and we don't know who we're interviewing.
Right. Things are happening so quickly. And some podcasters literally pull someone off of a crowd. So sometimes you do have to have someone introduce themselves. But again, if you have an interview, you have a guest and you know it's pre-planned, like scheduled a week ahead, do your research, do some homework. It makes them feel good, like you've prepared for them. And it kind of can be insulting if you're like, okay, so can you introduce yourself? Because I can't even pronounce
I don't know who the hell you are. Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Now, this is one that doesn't get talked about much, but is important to understand. Thou shalt not open your episode with an apology. If you missed a week, if you're late, don't talk about it. Or if you do it at the end. Don't do it at the beginning. You don't need to apologize at the beginning of your show. Just get rocking and rolling. We all make that mistake at some point.
Yeah.
We all do because we feel guilty. They aren't feeling guilty. The listener's not feeling guilty. You're the one feeling guilty.
That's true.
So you don't have to feel guilty. They want your content or they wouldn't hit play. They're just happy you're back. So thou shalt not overcomplicate your gear. Well, we're not getting into that.
I guess maybe the only exception I would say to the whole apology thing is maybe. Sometimes sound issues do happen. And you can do your best in post to get rid of them. And sometimes the content is so good that you really want to keep it. So in introducing the segment, say, okay, there's a fan in the background, or there's this.
It's usually when you have a guest on,
right? Just explain it so that at least the listener can understand the noise.
I totally agree.
That would
with
be one exception.
That's the one exception. And by doing that, their mind goes, okay, I'm ready. And usually it's not as bad as they think it's going to be.
They can almost filter it out themselves now that they know it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So this one, this one drives me nuts. Thou shalt not ask for reviews or Patreon support before delivering any content or having any freaking listeners. So here's what happened. There was a Facebook post last week, and this was interesting, and it was on one of I won't say which one. I'm not going to say who. But he posted on there, and he said, how do I get more Patreon support? I've been asking, and I only got one. So everybody came in. There must have been 20 posts about how he can do it, and blah, blah, blah. And finally I went, I'm going to ask him a question.
How many listeners does he have?
That's what I said. How many episodes have you done, and how many listeners do you have? He had 6 listeners with 6 episodes.
Well, then that's pretty good stats. If you got 1 out of 6 listeners.
That's what I told him. I said, the numbers, the averages are 3%. You're going to get 3% people that are of your listeners that are going to do something at whatever you ask them to do. Put a review up, send you an email, give you a response, or give you money. It's going to be 3%. It's 3 to 5 is the number in podcasting. Right. It's the number in radio, by the way. They say in radio, for every 1,000 listeners, if you have a call-in show, you'll get 1 caller.
Yeah, we're not talking about like calls to action regarding your advertisers. This is calls to action regarding can you help me out with my show?
Yes.
Right. Send me an email, review something. Yeah.
Well, then the comments were interesting after that, after people realized
the guru stepped in.
after he had no listeners and only 6 episodes, is you got to do some work here, buddy.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen immediately. If you're looking into getting into podcasting and getting rich immediately, if you come with an audience, you have a shot.
Or if you're not even just monetization plan, if your operating cost plan is to have listeners support your podcast from day one, it's not going to work out. You need to figure out other ways that you can self-support for a little while, because it takes a little while.
All right, we're going to wrap this up. I just wanted to say, one of his pet peeves is you should not call your episodes podcasts, which we all make that mistake of doing that every once in a while. But I don't think that one's. But his biggest thing at the end was, last one is thou shall not wing it. And we just talked about that earlier. Be prepared. Make it look to your audience like you've done some preparation. When we do our morning show, I probably do the longest daily. Well, I do the longest daily show in Florida, that's for sure. I do an hour and a half, 5 days a week, but I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I spend, Jemmy knows this, she's been at our house when I'm preparing. I get up and I spend a couple hours looking up content. We have backup plans. It's a live show, so we know if a guest doesn't show up, we have a backup plan, what we're going to talk about. Because it's a live show, you've got to have a plan. Yeah. And to the listener, it looks like if the guest doesn't show up, they don't know the difference.
And so you have a defined show and a defined plan for that episode and defined content to carry out that plan. So I'm going to rewind to what we're talking about when you're we're just going to do a show about the things we think are funny and about our lives. And then they take that very general concept and then they layer on top of it, just sitting down and flicking on microphones and just start talking. I've heard those shows, guys. They're terrible. You have to plan your show concept and then plan each episode. Don't wing it.
Well, there you go. That's the story. Actually, I was surprised in all of this that there wasn't, that the level of podfading has actually gone down.
That's good.
I think that's good, but I also think that we're in a bit of a bubble here with podcasting. I think that we're seeing tremendous growth. Not to be negative, but I think that one of the reasons we're in a bit of a bubble is a lot of people are coming into it thinking they're going to make a lot of money because there's a lot of money coming into the corporate side of podcasting. And those people are going to figure out very quickly it takes a very long time to make any money. And now, after all of those rants, let's get into the network news. And that would be the Florida Podcast Network News. Flintstone Media has been the digital bedrock of several Florida brands and businesses. Serving as a highly resourceful podcast production house, work with a leader in Florida's podcasting industry and add a podcast to your brand's content offerings. From setup through recording and distribution, Jemmy will lend her experience producing over 500 episodes and make the process of creating your show simple and easy for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for podcast samples. That's flintstonemedia.com.
Alrighty, so I don't know if y'all are aware, but one of our shows, People of Palm Beach, with host Suzanne Boyd, she now actually does that show on Facebook Live every other Thursday. So you don't have to just wait and listen on our feeds, and though we do appreciate the downloads for sure. But if you want to see her in action and see her guests where they are, a lot of times she broadcasts from, their workspace, their art museum or what have you, then just be sure to check out People of Palm Beach podcast on Facebook. Like I said, every other Thursday. So it'll be this Thursday, the 6th. You can catch her again. And speaking of other shows on the network, I am so excited. Yeah. So David Butler's show, the Florida Beer Podcast, as y'all know, have heard, is joining Florida Podcast Network. And we now have a launch date. Think of that. We're getting our things together. We have a launch date. And actually, it's July 4th, the 4th of July.
What, beer and the 4th go together?
Beer and the 4th go together, but what makes it even more poetic, so he's actually started this podcast already. And what number podcast is going to be the first one on the network on the 4th of July?
The 4th?
The 21st.
Oh.
So it comes of age just in time to join the Florida Podcast Network.
That's funny.
So I'm so excited. And actually, we played a clip last time of our interview introducing you to David on that last episode. So you can rewind and listen to that. Or you can catch now the full interview, which is out on our All Shows feed. So look up Florida Podcast Network on your favorite podcast players, or go to floridapodcastnetwork.com/Florida Beer Podcast to catch his full interview. And actually, one of the reasons that Glenn is in town and sitting on my couch right now is because we just met up with David yesterday. I wanted to get these two crazy guys together and meet. And I hadn't met David actually in person yet officially. So we met up at one of my favorite...
He knows a disturbing amount about beer.
He does, but it's not disturbing to me. I was like a super fan.
Jemmy still has a hangover from our meeting yesterday.
Maybe not. And so we met at Saltwater Breweries in Delray. And what's awesome about, and fortuitous and just poetic again about this, is that is the first, one of the first places I ever did an on-location interview long time ago when I was doing Curve the Cube. One of my first ever interviews was with Peter Aggerty, one of the co-founders of Saltwater. And so then we met up this time now with Dustin, another co-founder. And we did a whole interview with David and Dustin. We met David's whole family, his wife, his mom, his daughter. It was a lot of fun. We got to taste some flights. Glenn found a whole nother slew of beers he doesn't like. Because he's not a beer guy.
I'm consistent.
Not a beer guy. No umbrellas. He doesn't drink it.
You know what, though? We have it down pat now because we've been to several breweries on our show. And what'll happen is I'll sip them like I'm actually trying. And then Jemmy just sneaks them and then finishes them for me.
That's
so
true.
It makes it, and she does it in such a way that it doesn't look like I'm not drinking them.
And
so
we
it's
both
perfect.
end up very happy.
Yeah, that's true.
So he's going to include that interview in a future episode. So you'll get to hear us again. It's the second time that we have like a cross-pollination of shows. You'll hear Glenn and I on a future episode of Florida Beer Podcast. I'm so excited.
And to find out more about this show now, head to floridapodcastnetwork.com/Florida Beer Podcast. And subscribe now to Florida Podcast Network's All Show feed in your favorite podcast player. And now it's time for Jemmy's amazing podcasting tip of the episode.
You're such a dork. Alrighty, so my final tip, I'm actually pulling it from that presentation I did at Connecticut School of Broadcasting the other day. And I did my presentation on the basics of show structure. And what I really tried to emphasize is the key to structuring your show. Like, let's say you have a very, very beginning idea. I want to do a show about X. I want to do a show about Y. I want to do a show about Z. The key, no matter what it is telling your story. Now, obviously, you're going to be interviewing other people and doing all kinds of stuff. So you need to make sure that your interviewee is still the star of the show. But remember that ultimately you're trying to build an audience. You're trying to build a community. So it's really about sharing you. And I'm going to give it to Glenn to give his big famous line.
Don't be boring.
No.
They come for the content, but they stay for the host.
That's right. That's right. So no matter what your show is about, remember it's ultimately also about you. So if you're just starting to structure your show and thinking it through and deciding what to do, so you have an idea, a topic, well, remember to bring yourself out when it comes to the theme, the mission, the goals. Like, what is it from you personally that you can bring as your experience into your show structure, your show format? If you're doing a show about aviation, for example, if you're a pilot, then you need to talk about your expeditions. But if you're the luggage handler at the airport, then you have a very different perspective and probably a whole lot more comedy involved in your show. And so that's the perspective you need to bring to your show. So no matter what the show topic is about, bring yourself into it. It'll influence your tone, the type of guests you pull from your network, your connections, like bring yourself into it a bit. So if you making this super, super quick, because we've dived into a lot of stuff today, but if you want to find out more and really get a good sense of all the different ways that details about yourself, your personality, your experience can influence your show and make it really stand out, go to flintstonemedia.com/CSB because all of my slides are right there waiting for you. You can check them out.
I just want to add one thing to that too.
Yeah.
So we say they come for the content, they stay for the host. So what you're in essence selling to your listeners, you. Mm-hmm. That's also true when you're selling your advertising or your sponsorships. True. You're not selling your show. Mm-hmm. They're not buying your show. They're buying you.
Right.
that's what they're buying. You're selling you. And most people make the mistake thinking they're buying the show, and the numbers know they're buying because they believe in you.
Right. So, for example, David...
Now, if your show sucks, it's going to make, it's going to be a...
or if you suck.
Yeah, it's going to be... I don't know how you fix that, actually, but that's true.
Yeah. So, for example, David Butler with Florida Beer Blog, he's going to be interviewing brewers from all over the place. But at the same time, what makes his show brilliant and interesting is his curiosity and his history of his knowledge of writing this for 5 years. So,
and drinking every beer in the state.
Right. So bring yourself into the show, because that's what's going to make your show stand out. You don't want to be that group of people just sitting around a microphone talking about random stuff that makes no sense. Define your show, define your episodes, and bring yourself into it.
David's still mad I don't like beer, I think.
You brought the wrong girl to the dance, that's for sure. Well, for more updates on all of this and other news, plus details and show notes about today's show, go to FloridaPodcastingNews.com. Plus, sign up to receive the newsletter that accompanies this podcast. And we'd really love your feedback. We hope to see you in FPN Insiders. We get new members almost every day. And so that's on Facebook as a closed group. We have interesting conversations in there all about our shows and Florida and different kinds of things, scoops, contests, special treats, you name it, we do it.
And if you're coming, let us know if you're coming to Podcast Movement. We'd love to meet up with you.
Oh, please. Yes. So maybe we'll even schedule some sort of lunch or meetup or something. We'll have to figure it out. But if you have any podcasting news to submit, you can do what Chris Krimitsos did the other day in emailing us when he sent us that promo code. Just email Jemmy, Jaime, at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com, and we'll include it in the show.
Many thanks to this week's sponsor, Flintstone Media. And be sure to visit all the great shows in the Florida Podcast Network. You can find them at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com.
Until next time, thanks for hanging out on the inside of Florida's podcasting industry.